Humanity has been bestowed with great gifts. Perhaps greatest of all is our imagination, because ultimately it's our imaginations that enable us to shape the world around us. The most obvious examples of that are the great buildings and architecture all around us. But which works of architecture should we see during our lifetimes? Find out in Top 10, The Art of Architecture. Sporting stadiums have become gladiatorial arenas for today's sporting heroes. But the first stadium we know was built some 2,800 years ago in Olympia, Greece, for the ancient Olympic Games. Sports and games were an important part of European culture in the ancient world. But as the Roman Empire declined, sport was marginalized, and this was largely the case right up until the 19th century. Modern sports and athletic stadiums proliferated after World War II, and the 10 magnificent stadiums we are about to visit are celebrated not only as the venues for sporting glory, but as remarkable feats of architecture and engineering. Olympic Stadium, Athens, Greece. The double-arched Olympic Stadium in Athens, the central venue for the 2004 Summer Olympics, is a great way to begin this episode. The stadium was designed in 1979 and inaugurated in 1982 for the 13th European Athletics Championships. It was an innovative and interactive stadium design then, and still is today.
The facade was not the image of the stadium, but in fact the people climbing and meeting each other on these different levels, or at least that's the expectation I have of it, which I liked very much as an idea, as a concept.
In the 1990s, other sporting facilities were built nearby. The Olympic Velodrome, the Olympic Aquatic Centre, and the Olympic Indoor Sports Centre. Today, they make up the Olympic Athletic Centre known as the Spiros Louis, after Spiridon Louis. Spiros was a Greek champion of the first modern-day Olympic marathon at the 1896 Athens Olympics. Built by the German design and construction company Wildeplan, the stands of the Oval Stadium are supported by 34 sets of huge pillars made from prefabricated concrete. 4 further pillars once loomed over the stadium, holding its floodlights, but these were removed for the 2004 Summer Olympics. The redesign by the world-renowned Spanish sculptor and architect Santiago Calatrava included the roof of the stadium, the velodrome, and a makeover for the entire complex. The new and lavish roof is one of the most striking features. It consists of 2 half shells which cover the seats but leave the playing field open. Both of the double bowstring-tied arches consist of 2 steel tubes, a dense 3.5 meters in diameter. The arches support polycarbonate roof panels, a much lighter material than the original planned glass panes. Even so, each half of the roof still weighs some 8,500 tons. Both halves were assembled on either side of the stadium. They were then lifted hydraulically into position, which is no mean feat.
From servicing point of view, it's also important that the stadium is used regularly after the game events.
With a span of 304 meters, the whole of the roof rests on just 4 bases, where the arches intersect. The roof is structurally independent from the stadium, which makes it similar to the roof of the London Olympic Stadium. Part of the roof is transparent, good for lighting and filming conditions. A special coating that is designed to reflect 60% of the sun's rays has been applied to the panels. Similar roofing was used for the renovation of the Olympic Velodrome in London. In both instances, serving to create an aesthetically pleasing yet efficiently functional structure. Olympiastadion, Munich, Germany. The Olympic Stadium in Munich, Germany, is the second oldest in our top 10, but no less impressive for it. Quite the contrary. The roof of this stadium, a lightweight tent-like construction, was a bold statement for its times. It was designed as part of the complex of sports venues and buildings for the 1972 Summer Olympics. But this was part of a wider rejuvenation of the city of Munich.
That works very well if you have a city that has a strong development. In cities where this is less, it's very often it's sort of a carcass that remains for a very long time.
A flat, largely undeveloped plot of land in North Munich was transformed into a hillocky landscape, into which the main sports fields were integrated. The arenas and pitches were sunk below ground level, and the key facilities all hidden under the stands or underground. The 3 main sports sites at the edge of the central plateau, stadium, sports hall and swimming pool, are connected by a shared undulating roof. The translucent pre-stressed roof consists of a net of steel cables with a covering of acrylic glass sheets. The roof was designed by Frei Otto, a German architect and structural engineer who specialized in lightweight structures. He had already amazed visitors to Expo 67 in Montreal with a similar concept. Suspended on massive steel pillars, the roof gives the stadium a tent-like appearance, especially at some points where it reaches to the ground. The forces at work are carefully calculated and balanced against each other.
The Munich Olympic Stadium was built for Olympics in 1972, and in that time it showed already very progressive architecture and engineering construction and concept.
The sheets of acrylic glass are connected to each other by flexible chloroprene strips, which also drain rainwater away. The transparent roof lets in all the necessary light and eliminates shadow contrasts. This ensures the sharpest possible TV images. Pretty slick for 1972. Frei Otto's experimental structure made him famous. In 2015, the year he died, he was awarded the Pritzker Architecture Prize for his lifelong work. This is the architectural world's equivalent of an Oscar or Pulitzer Prize. There was unexpected horror and tragedy at the 1972 Olympics. Several members of the Israeli Olympic team were killed by a Palestinian terrorist group. Despite these events, the Olympic spirit somehow prevailed. For the city itself, the Games triggered a massive rush to modernize post-war Munich. The skyline was set for change.
The new trends of structural engineering or architecture design also brings new elements to the stadiums or to stadium structures.
The fantastic transparent cloud or cobweb became the architectural centerpiece of the Olympic Park and an icon of Munich in the years to come. Olympic Stadium, Montreal, Canada. After Munich in 1972, the Summer Olympics of '76 were held in Montreal, largest town in the Canadian province of Quebec, and indeed the second largest city in Canada. In the eastern part of the city, a large plot became the site of the Olympic Park and surrounding sports complex. Its centerpiece was the magnificent new Olympic Stadium, its instantly recognizable inclined tower with retractable roof. In 1972, 2 years after Montreal was chosen to host the Games, French architect Roger Talibert presented his design. It involved a highly organic style apparently inspired by marine biology. Talibert is also responsible for the Olympic pool and Olympic velodrome, both adjacent to the stadium. The stadium was designed as a colossal elliptical cantilevered structure, which resembles a shell that is opened in the middle. It was originally intended that the huge 168-meter-tall leaning tower hold up a movable synthetic textile roof suspended from it. The tower was not ready in time for the Olympics, however, and was added later. The main components of the stadium shell are 34 self-stabilizing concrete cantilevers, which uncovered are reminiscent of ribs or fingers. These point towards the center of the stadium. They support the stadium stands, stairways, and the fixed section of the retractable roof design.
The Olympic Stadium of Montreal is not very special structure as for roofing and seating, but what is very exceptional is how the roof is retracted.
The tower was also meant to contain 18 floors of sports facilities, 27,000 square meters. But bad weather and mismanagement combined to see only a quarter of the tower completed by the time the Games had begun. After the Games, Quebec government declared the tower and roof would be completed according to Talibair's original plan. In reality, it wasn't until 1987 that the tower, now a bit lower in height, was constructed, and the rubberized Kevlar roof could be installed. But even that was not the end of it. Over the years, the roof proved too sensitive for the harsh Montreal climate and was replaced by non-retractable Teflon-coated fiberglass panels.
As for structural design in 70s and nowadays, there is a difference that the materials are of better quality, of higher resistance, but the materials as a concrete, pre-stressed concrete, steel, cables are almost the same.
Despite drawbacks during construction, the stadium is still majestic. And today, the non-movable column-free elliptical section of the roof is as striking a feature as when the new stadium was first completed. Also today, the looming tower, apparently the tallest inclined tower in the world, is awe-inspiring, especially when lit up at night. Taking a unique glass-encased cable car to the top for the views is always fun. Soccer City, Johannesburg, South Africa. From 2008 to 2010, the first National Bank Stadium in Johannesburg, South Africa, underwent extensive renovation in order to host the 2010 FIFA World Cup. The building, now called the Soccer City, was intended to visually represent the whole African continent.
The Soccer City in South Africa, in Johannesburg, has the same trend and as many other stadiums in the world, like in China, for example, the Nest. It shows something local, something African.
The original stadium, which seated 80,000 spectators, first opened in 1989. In 1996, it held the African Cup of Nations, and 3 years later, the Pan-African Games. But when in 2004, South Africa was chosen to host the 2010 World Cup, the first World Cup ever held on the African continent, a major revamp was called for. It was also necessary to increase seating capacity. For the reconstruction, the studio Bugertman and Partners and the HOK Sport Company were chosen. The latter, today called Populous, is an architectural firm specializing in sports-related buildings. Populous have worked on projects including Wembley Stadium and Wimbledon Centre Court in London, Yankee Stadium in New York, and the Australia Stadium in Sydney. The old stadium in Johannesburg was partly demolished and its foundations were used for a new building, the new symbol of African soccer. The shape of the stadium is like a calabash, an African pot that is made by hollowing out and drying a plant known as a white-flowered gourd. The facade, supported by 120 concrete pillars located on the perimeter of the building, consists of thousands of fiberglass reinforced concrete slabs in the colors of fire and earth. The facade is divided by 10 slits that form a symbolic connection with previous World Cup stadiums. The roof that encircles the pitch consists of a Teflon fiber membrane with an area of 54,000 square meters. Below the membrane, there are walkways to the stands. The number of seats was increased by almost 9,000, but it came at a price. The cost of the renovation soared to 300 million euros. The surrounding area also improved thanks to the World Cup. New transport connections, roads and shopping centres were built for visitors. Today the stadium is used mainly by the soccer team Kaizer Chiefs and the South African national soccer team, widely known in Zulu as Bafana Bafana. Although the 2010 World Cup in Africa was won by Spain, the event and the stadium still had a great deal of meaning for many South Africans. It also made world history because of an event unrelated to sports. Soon after he was released from prison in early 1990, apartheid freedom fighter Nelson Mandela made a speech at the stadium. Shortly after his death, a public memorial for this great statesman was held there. Wembley Stadium, London, UK. Our architectural top 10 takes us next to Wembley Stadium. Wembley itself is an otherwise typical slice of suburban London, best known for its football stadium. What makes Wembley so iconic is a retractable roof supported by the striking arch, which soars above the stadium and is visible across London.
Stadiums can also destroy neighborhoods and make them very unlivable. All is depending a lot on how it's done, how it's used.
The new Wembley Stadium officially opened to the public in 2007. It was constructed on the site of the earlier Wembley Stadium, or Empire Stadium, built for the British Empire exhibition of 1924. The distinctive white twin towers of the old stadium were an icon of British sporting history, host to events such as the 1948 Olympics and the Euro final of 1996. But it was almost entirely demolished in 2003 to make way for its modern successor. Completed ahead of schedule, the new stadium hosted its first FA Cup final in 2006 with a huge crowd of some 200,000 people. The new stadium covers twice the area of the original and is almost 4 times higher. The British architecture studio Foster & Partners, now famous, for example, for the London skyscraper nicknamed the Gherkin, worked in tandem with the American sports architectural company Populous to redesign the new-look Wembley.
The stadium, from the point of view of structure, it's very difficult to rebuild or to renew. You can rebuild a few parts of a stadium like a bridge, but you cannot rebuild everything or replace materials. So Wembley Stadium, for example, the old one, has already expired as for material lifetime or architecture design or capacity or efficiency for services.
As much of a challenge as reinventing Wembley must have been, the architects outdid themselves with the new design. With a span of 315 metres, the new-look Wembley's steel arch is the longest single-span roof structure in the world. It supports the north roof and 60% of the south. This enables the south roof to retract, letting light and air onto the pitch. Around a third of the roof is retractable. Based on computer modelling of air movement and sunlight, this prevents shadows falling on the pitch. The arch also removed the need for supporting pillars, which would have obscured the views for many in the stadium. With its bowl-shaped geometry and higher, steeply raked seating plan, Wembley Stadium provides wonderful spectator views. Thanks to its innovative design, Wembley Stadium is an instantly recognisable London landmark, something not only for sports fans. The National Aquatic Centre, Beijing, China. The Beijing National Aquatic Centre, known as the Water Cube, was built in connection with the Olympics of 2008. That Beijing should host the 29th Summer Games had been decided 7 years previously at a meeting of the International Olympic Committee in Moscow. Beijing won thanks to its promise to complete building the sports facilities 1 year in advance. This was in order to avoid a repeat of the last-minute organised chaos of the 2004 Olympics in Athens. The Chinese organisers' architectural competitions helped them stay ahead of the game. The architectural competition was an international affair. The ultimate winners were a consortium consisting of 2 Chinese state companies, the British engineering group Arup and the Australian studio PTW Architects. It was they who essentially designed the stadium as a huge block whose casing is made of transparent panels in the shape of bubbles. The architects found their inspiration for this structure in water itself, and in the works of the physicist Lord Kelvin and his Irish disciples Dennis Weary and Robert Phelan. They had been trying to divide space into cells of equal size with the least possible surface area between them, much like water. The result was the complex three-dimensional structure known as the Weary-Phelan foam. This structure, consisting of a combination of dodecahedrons and tetradecahedrons, was cut by the architects into identically sized cubes. The results are definitely unique. National Stadium, Beijing, China. And we need only go next door in Beijing for number 4 of our countdown, the so-called Bird's Nest. The design for China's National Stadium, a memorable symbol of the 29th Summer Olympics, emerged from an international competition. A Swiss studio, Herzog and de Meuron, emerged victorious after competing against 12 other participants in 2003. All around the so-called Bird's Nest today, there are squares, stadiums, and sports facilities, buildings for athletes and staff or transportation terminals. But what about its purpose today?
I went to the bird nest, and it's huge, and it's now mainly an attraction for tourists, just to go there and see the former Olympic terrains areas. That's a difficult one.
It's easy to see why the stadium is nicknamed the Bird's Nest, and it's a remarkable building. Principal architects Jacques Herzog and Pierre de Meuron are known around the world as proponents of minimalism. So they originally intended to design the stadium as looking something like a large bowl, typical of traditional Chinese ceramics. However, during project phase, they had a major rethink. The most noticeable change was removal of the proposed retractable roof and uncovering of the support structure. The project was also joined by British structural engineers, Chinese planners, and conceptual artist Ai Weiwei. The result is a building which symbolizes the spirit of collectivism, undoubtedly one of the Olympic ideals. The skeleton of the stadium is a combination of partly reinforced concrete and steel. Steel was used to make the outer frame protecting the red reinforced concrete spectator bowl, with its huge grandstands and facilities. The stadium roof is supported by 24 trussed columns, each weighing over 1,000 tons. Regularly spaced, almost identical columns are hidden in a steel chaos of diagonal wind braces, so that their position is not clear at first or even second sight. Their original task was to carry a retractable roof, but in the end, this was discarded. Due to security reasons, the number of seats was reduced from 100,000 to 91,000, giving the stadium a much airier feel without sacrificing its vital anti-seismic design. The cost of building the Chinese National Stadium was estimated to be as low as 10% of the comparable price tag in the Western world. To give some idea, in one single day, thousands of workers were able to lay down over 7,500 square meters of grass, irrigated by water collected from the roof of the stadium. After the Olympics, the National Stadium was transformed into a soccer stadium with a capacity of 80,000 spectators. The Olympic Village was made over as a shopping centre and hotel. But whatever changes have been made, its unique design and aesthetics have been preserved. And that's worth celebrating. Olympic Stadium, London, UK. Britain has a long tradition of hosting Olympic Games. The first were held in London in 1908, the fourth Games of the so-called modern Olympic era. After the Second World War, the old Wembley Stadium, built for the British Empire exhibition of 1924, hosted the 1948 Summer Olympics. But for the London Summer Olympics of 2012, a whole new Olympic park had to be built.
As for London Olympic Stadium, built for Olympic Games in 2012, you may see how it changed its purpose from Olympic Games Stadium to football or other similar events some years after.
The plot chosen for the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park was at 2.5 square kilometres, roughly the same size as London's Hyde Park. When the British capital won the Olympic bid in 2005, this was an underdeveloped, polluted corner of East London, some 13 kilometres from the centre. But in 2011, after the cleaning of some 1.5 million cubic metres of contaminated soil and 3 years of construction works, the Olympic Park was opened. It was designed by architects from, again, Populous, the American architectural company that designed some of the prominent stadiums already visited in this episode. But the construction company entrusted with building the complex was Sir Robert McAlpines, the very same company that had built the old Wembley Stadium 88 years before. The elegant structure combines the external diagonal white steelwork that supports the roof, while on the inside, a black steel structure supports the upper seating tier.
If it's a large stadium, you can omit such a roof, but a new modern approach and comfort for the people watching the games is almost necessary to have a retractable roof.
The structurally independent roof is covered by PVC fabric on an innovative lightweight cable net with an inner tension cable ring and an outer steel compression truss. One of the design principles was, of course, sustainability. For the 2012 Games, a large stadium was needed. But for long-term usage after the Games, a smaller scale venue was deemed more appropriate.
They already think ahead of the after Olympics and how the stadium can be reduced again, make a bit smaller, and how other structures can be sort of absorbed in the development of the city.
Plans on how to use the stadium after the Olympics have changed more than once, and the stadium is currently being adapted to become a multi-purpose venue for both sporting events and cultural activities. The 2017 World Athletics Championships is being held there, for instance. Post-Olympic renovations include the installation of a new cantilevered roof, combining solid with transparent covering. Twice the size of the original roof, it will become the largest roof of its kind in the world. Fisht Olympic Stadium, Sochi, Russia. Fisht Olympic Stadium was built for the 22nd Winter Olympics of February 2014, held in the mountain resort of Krasnaya Polyana and the coastal town of Sochi. The stadium takes its name from Mount Fisht, nearby in the Central Caucasian Mountains. The architects from the American company Populous say they were inspired by the world-famous Fabergé eggs. Jeweler Carl Peter Fabergé made a series of them between 1885 and 1917 for the Russian imperial family. But what about the practicalities of stadium design?
If you build the stadium for winter games or summer games, there is one big difference. You have to keep the cool inside for winter games stadium. But as for structural point of view, the problems are similar.
The Olympic Stadium project, which was also a project of the British design studio Buro Happold, contains more than one surprising feature. Above all, there is the atypical retractable roof, which when open has breathtaking views of the Caucasian mountains and the shores of the Black Sea. The stadium roof is made of FT, a polymer with excellent sound and heat insulating properties. The material is also stable against UV rays, but has a high light transmission. This was only the third time in history that an FT foil has been used to such an extent on a project of this scale. The FT pillows covered the steel frame, which is part of the moving mechanism allowing the roof to open fully or close. The Olympic Stadium roof covers more than 36,000 square meters. From a structural point of view, it combines steel and reinforced concrete frames, the latter painted white. Architects conceived the impressive stadium as an oval with two tiers of grandstands encircling the pitch, providing space for 40,000 spectators. This capacity will be increased in the near future due to the Soccer World Cup in 2018. The stadium will then be adapted for the training and tournaments of the Russian national soccer team, with seating capacity reduced to 25,000 spectators. In 2014, the Fisht Olympic Stadium, whose construction cost more than 50 billion rubles, appeared on the reverse side of the 100-ruble banknote. Maracanã Stadium, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. For many, Brazil equals soccer. So it's not surprising that in Rio de Janeiro, we find one of the oldest and also largest soccer stadiums in the world. In honor of the sports journalist Mario Filho, who initiated its construction, the stadium is officially called Estadio Jornalista Mario Filho. It was built to be ready for the World Cup of 1950. The final match, in which the Uruguayan team defeated Brazil 2-1, was watched by a record-breaking 200,000 spectators. The history of this soccer shrine began shortly after World War II, when the International Federation of Football Associations, known as FIFA, asked Brazil to organize a soccer championship. For the site, a location in the Maracanã district was chosen, and the stadium, over time, became known as the Maracanã.
So these Olympic games or world championships or these huge events, they can have a big impact, but they also generate activity. So in the run towards it, when all the benefits are promised and how great it will be for the city or the country, it also generates a lot of activity and entrepreneurship, and people are excited about it.
The fierce competition in the public tender was won by a team of 7 young architects. For them, this was no ordinary architectural commission. Their stadium was expected to be a reflection of the Brazilian place in World Cup history.
The biggest soccer stadium must be built, of course, in Brazil, nowhere else.
Architects designed the impressive stadium as an oval arena with a long axis and 2 tiers of grandstands encircling the pitch. The more popular upper grandstand has something of the character of a theatre balcony. The strictly symmetrical stadium could be entered through one of 2 entrances, both with triumphal arches and ramps, through which crowds could seamlessly flow into the upper grandstand. Spectator capacity is in excess of 155,000. There are, of course, VIP guest areas, booths for TV crews, food stalls and other necessary facilities.
The refitting of Maracanã Stadium for Olympic Games will be a very large one. And it's interesting then that many stadiums were rebuilt from Olympic Games purpose to another purpose, but this time the soccer stadium will be rebuilt for Olympic Games stadium.
Original construction of the soccer stadium took place between 1948 and 1950, with more than 10,000 labouring in the sweltering heat. After its opening, the Maracanã Stadium, which was only fully completed in the 1960s, was for a time the biggest football stadium in the world. The current capacity of Estadio do Maracanã is 78,000 spectators plus. In 2014, the stadium hosted the World Cup, and in 2016 is a venue for the 31st Summer Olympic Games. We have seen some truly jaw-dropping stadiums, which today are often at the heart of the regeneration of contemporary cities, as was the case with the Olympic Stadium in London, and the various events they host, which draw visitors all year long. Plus, of course, the millions more who watch on TV or the internet. Sports and athletic stadiums have become urban icons, easily recognizable all over the world. They all depend on state-of-the-art architectural and technological solutions that push the boundaries of engineering and design.